but there has to be some lines drawn. And so the reason why the cabinet office are involved, they're not responding as politicians. They're trying to establish firm rules, not just now, but also for the future, as to what is the line where what would otherwise have been private conversations between ministers and civil servants will become public property. And that's a very important issue, regardless of who is the government or who was the prime minister at the time.
But let's begin by looking at Rishi Sunak leaving his domestic worries behind him. And he is going to head to the US, where he's hoping for a warm reception from President Biden. Of course, there's this deepening row back home between the Cabinet Office and Boris Johnson. Let's talk to the former Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcom Rifkind, about what's on the agenda with the US trip. There's trade, there's the war in Ukraine, there's the regulation of artificial intelligence, of course. Good morning, Sir Malcom.
Good morning.
How significant do you see this trip? I mean, I was reading today, it's 4 times in 4 months that Rishi Sunak has met President Biden.
Yeah, I must say I'm pretty impressed by the attention that Rishi Sunak is giving to President Biden and the warm reception he's getting from the president. As you say, they've met 3 times already at various international conferences, but also in Belfast briefly. But on this occasion, this is specifically a bilateral visit to Washington. They apparently are housing him in Blair House, which is the prime government guest house for the most important VIPs. And of course, Britain and America have always had a very good relationship. But part of that relationship is that the British Prime Minister, and this goes back to Churchill, it goes back to Thatcher and other prime ministers, you have to be candid also with the American president. There are some areas where there might be disagreement.
I mean, one of the issues clearly which the British government will want to make progress on is trade. We know, of course, the problems that the British economy is facing right now, and the government is really pushing for growth. But Number 10 seems to be really playing down the idea of any trade deals coming out of this because, as well, Kate McCann was telling us earlier on, it's still very much America first.
Well, it's not just, of course it's America first if you're an American, it's Britain first if you're British, and the same goes for every other country in the world. But what we've seen over the years, and I think the government's playing this one rather better than it has done in the past, is the idea of having a massive bilateral trade deal between the United States and the United Kingdom. First of all, it would take months, if not years, to negotiate, even if there's goodwill on both sides. But secondly, the Americans will give pretty little to any country in the world because they know that they have such economic strength that they can concede if they wish to, but don't have to. So what the British government seems to be doing at the moment, they're already having a series of bilateral trade negotiations with individual states. Because America is that sort of country. So California is on the list. They already have had talks with 2 or 3 other states. They're much easier to handle and to get quick results. That doesn't rule out a US-UK trade agreement at some time, but it shouldn't be seen as an immediate priority. It'd be misleading the public on both sides of the pond to suggest that that is attainable, not just for Britain, but for any country in the world.
We were talking to a former US ambassador to the UK earlier on, and he was telling us that the concerns about AI are a bit further ahead in this country than the US. The US is still sort of to catch up on that. But we know that Rishi Sunak has said in the last few days he'd like to set up a watchdog, an international watchdog here in the UK to kind of look at keeping control of AI. I know that you were former chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee. What are your thoughts on that? What are the chances of that? And is it a good idea?
Well, we have to be concerned about artificial intelligence, AI as it's widely known, and not because of what it currently can do, but what its potential is. I mean, the more sophisticated these computers become, the real risk is that at some stage, and it may not be for a few years, but it could be sooner, computers will be so sophisticated that they not only receive and carry out the messages and instructions they've been given by their human handlers, if I can put it that way, but they have such inbuilt procedural competence that they can then send out instructions to other computers, and then it gets beyond the control by governments or by individual people or companies. So it is good that the people who are doing the original research, many of whom are British, many are American from other countries, they are themselves saying what we are working on at the moment has risks as well as opportunities. There is a need for governments to become involved and to have some sort of regulatory constraints. And of course, within the global situation, United States particularly, but the United Kingdom coming a pretty close second or third are some of the prime countries involved, not only in the research that's being carried out, but in the way in which the AI issue will be resolved to the benefit of the community in various countries and not as a risk and a threat.
I must ask you as well about, well, this story that is an exclusive in the Sunday Times today from Gabriel Pogrund, that the Cabinet Office has told Boris Johnson he won't have public funding for his legal advice for the COVID inquiry if he doesn't effectively play ball, if he doesn't make sure that he releases evidence to the government first so they can look at it, they can effectively proofread it, redact certain things. I mean, it would look like he's kind of gone against that already by going straight to the inquiry and giving his WhatsApp messages. How sticky do you think this is going to become between Boris Johnson and indeed the government?
Well, it's really two separate issues that have become conflated. We know Boris Johnson, we know his style, and he will, of course, be very concerned that any WhatsApps that are given to the inquiry may have information either about COVID or about other matters that might prove personally inconvenient, if I can put it that way, to him, or positively embarrassing. So you can see he has a personal interest in having some control over this. And that's something that has to be borne in mind. From the point of view of the Cabinet Office and from the government, this is not just about COVID. This is about a very important question of whether a precedent will be created. If somebody has been asked to carry out a public inquiry on a specific issue, as is COVID, does that mean that all government documents, all conversations that took place with ministers on WhatsApp or in some other means have to be automatically released without redaction, even if much of the content that is released has got absolutely nothing to do with the subject of the inquiry? Now, what we have at the moment is the president of the inquiry, the COVID inquiry, saying, I must be the judge of whether it's relevant or not. And that's not an unreasonable objective. But there has to be some lines drawn. And so the reason why the Cabinet Office are involved, they're not responding as politicians. They're trying to establish firm rules, not just now, but also for the future, as to what is the line where what would otherwise have been private conversations between ministers and civil servants will become public property. And that's a very important issue, regardless of who is the government or who was the Prime Minister at the time.
Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
That is the former Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcom Rifkind.